Sujatha Jesadasan, and I know we have a couple of participants already on, so if you can just in the chat box let us know if you can both see and hear us. There should be two of us presenters, Chanel Matthews, who's one of our current fellows, and me. So if you can just chat in, and yeah, we'll get started soon. And it looks like a couple of folks are typing.
That is so strange. Okay, let me see what to do.
Okay. Yeah, so it looks like folks cannot see Chanel. She's working on it. It's amazing, for as many times as we all do this stuff, the technical glitches still consume the first 5 to 10 minutes of any event. So still no luck, huh?
I'm just restarting the application, so maybe it'll pop up again. So
okay,
but,
great.
You can probably go ahead.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to get started, and I'll just sort of say a couple introductory things, and hopefully the video issue will get resolved. So this webinar is really intended to give folks an overview of our Generative Fellowship program. We'll cover some basic outlines both of who Coraline is, what we're trying to do with the fellowship, some of the things that folks might learn in the fellowship, and then Chanel will talk about her experience. She is a current fellow in our first cohort of fellows, and then mostly we're just going to leave it open for question and answers. So if folks have clarifying questions about the application or the experience, and at any point during the presentation, feel free to chat your questions in, and we can answer them as we go along. So and it looks like Chanel is still rebooting her program. So I will get started so folks can see the PowerPoint. And so some folks already are familiar with Coraline, but for those who aren't, or for whom this is your first experience with Coraline, let me just say a little bit about us. So we are a project that started about a little less than 2 years ago, and the idea of Coraline emerged out of a conversation that Tracy Wheats and I had. And this was back in late 2010, where things were looking really bad for the reproductive health rights and justice movement, particularly at a legislative level. And you can see here from this little graph by the Guttmacher Institute. So back in 2010, 92 pieces of anti-choice and abortion-related restriction legislation was passed in the country. What this graph doesn't show is of the 92 pieces of legislation that got passed, the anti-choice movement introduced 1,100 pieces of legislation. So there were essentially 1,100 attempts to restrict access to abortion in the United States. They only had a 9% success rate, which gave them 92 pieces of legislation. And in that same time period, the pro-choice movement had only introduced 2 pieces of proactive legislation that was intended to expand access to abortion. And at the same time, when the discourse, the public discourse at the time, was also this narrative of how, Roe v. Wade we won 40 years ago, and ever since then that we had been losing. So in this context, Tracy and I were having a conversation about both kind of our frustration with what was going on, and also the tremendous potential in the movement. Like, both of us were very well connected in the movement. There were an incredible number of people that we knew, that we worked with on a daily basis, that we knew were smart and dedicated and committed and passionate. And so our question to ourselves was essentially, this little graph of like, life is pretty simple. Like, in our case, we asked the question, like, as a movement, are we successful? If the answer would have been yes, then we would have kept on doing what we were doing. But since the answer was no, that we weren't winning the kinds of things that we wanted to win, we decided that we were going to change something, and that we were going to do something different and do something do things differently. And it was in that context that Coraline was we gave voice to this idea of Coraline, which is that we wanted to build a movement, to galvanize a movement where we were winning a future where all people would have the resources, rights, and respect to make their own sexual and reproductive decisions, that it was really a movement in support of all people's sexual and reproductive lives, not only at the level of legislation, but also at this level of respect, cultural respect, and also resources so that people could actually access the choices that were made available. And so Coraline is essentially what we call a think and do tank, building a network of leaders working innovatively to change policies, cultures, and conditions so that in support of all people's sexual and reproductive decisions and lives. This is the overarching vision and mission for Coraline. And we are a movement building project. So we started out the work of Coraline traveling around the country. We went to 13 different cities. We did 3 webinars where we basically talked about, like, this is what we saw as the current state of the movement, what did other people, what was other people's assessment, and we got some really fascinating information about what was happening around the country. And based on that, we decided to implement 3 core strategies. And I'm just checking in with Chanel. It looks like
Sujatha, if you can make me a presenter again.
Oh, okay, great.
That might.
All right, hold on. Okay. All right.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to turn my camera on now.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks. And I see me. Oh, there you go. All right.
Hi.
Okay. So let me just finish this part. And essentially, Coraline has 3 main strategies that we're trying to implement in what we see as the movement to build resources, rights, and respect for all people's sexual and reproductive lives. The first one is to support and build a culture of innovation in the movement. When we traveled around the country and talked to about 500 folks in the movement, one of the things that we heard again and again was the sense of, like, we're kind of doing the same old things and we're getting the same results, and given that we're not happy with the results, like, we need to start thinking about doing things differently. Chanel, looks like we've lost your video again. So
I'm sorry, I have no idea what to do.
Okay. Well, we'll just keep going, and if it comes back on, great. Yeah, it must be something in your computer that's turning it off. Anyway, in terms of building a culture of innovation in the movement, for anybody who's participated in any Coraline events, you'll see that we have a really big emphasis on leaning into risk and doing things differently and being generous and generative. And the fellowship very much fits in this part of the work. Our second strategy is to practice and develop a long-term planning and coordination muscle in the movements, that oftentimes we work in organizations or we work in projects where we're planning 1 year out, maybe 2 years out. If we're lucky, we're in an organization that's doing strategic planning that's 3 years out, maybe 5 years out, but neither at the movement level nor at regional levels are we really thinking 10, 20, 30, 50 years out. And so that an important part of what needs to happen in our movement is we need to start thinking long-term, thinking and planning long-term, and so that Coraline is going to create spaces and opportunities for folks to come together to do that. And then the third strategy, and we've heard this again and again in all of the convenings that we've done around the country, both in their 13-city tour, but also we've done about 17 events around the country in terms of breakthrough conversations, different kinds of gatherings, 30-year vision and planning sessions, where again and again this issue that comes up that people see as the biggest bottleneck to innovation and long-term planning and movement building is our inability to kind of work through and talk about and resolve issues of race and power in the movement. And so one of our other strategies is going to be building our capacity to talk about race and power in service of building authentic and trusting relationships in the movement. And all of that is to say that that just basically gives you a little context for the Innovation Fellowships. And so one of the things we want to be very clear about is that this is really a call for folks who are, you might not have thought of yourself as an innovator, you might just have some interesting innovative ideas, but that you are kind of thinking about, oh, I have an idea that I want to kind of look into. And so that is what this is. So the goals of the fellowship are threefold, and now I seem to have lost all kinds of audio-visual. Oops, and I just lost my presentation. Hold on a second. There's a lot of technical difficulties going on here. Wait, sorry. There we go. And folks can see the PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, okay. If you can't, just say something in the chat box. So the goals of the fellowship are threefold: increase individuals' abilities to innovate, create the culture and network of innovation so that there's support for that ability and the increasing development of that ability to innovate, and then really grow the number of innovative movement level possibilities. So movement level ideas, so we can start talking about doing things differently at an organizational level, at a project level, at a movement level. The only requirements that we have for applying for the fellowship is that people show up as curious and generous and generative and be willing to lean into risk and discomfort. And Chanel can probably talk more about that from an experiential point of view. And that just in terms of applying for the program, that you just have to have some movement level idea or inquiry or question that you want to explore or develop or test or prototype or just play with. So that's part of, you'll see as part of the application process. And then finally, like in terms of a commitment, it's very basic, recognizing how busy people's lives are, and that for most folks that they have full-time jobs or part-time jobs. So that we're asking folks we just designed this to be a 6-month program so that folks could, it wouldn't be too big a commitment and it would not seem like an overwhelming commitment, and that the 6 months is bookended by 2 3-day retreats, so one in the beginning and one at the end, and in between the retreats, people participate in conference calls and networking, that they work on their project to the extent possible, and that we really, we are looking for folks who are committed to ideas, but also willing to shift. And be flexible. So to the extent possible, move your project along, and Chanel will talk about her project. And then the only one concrete deliverable that we ask folks is that at the end the fellows share their learnings from their projects in a 15-minute TED-style talk. In terms of the content of the fellowship, we essentially base it around 3 concepts: research, resilience, and relating. So the research is we actually teach a methodology for innovation that's based out of the Stanford Design School. And if you become a fellow, you will recognize this little diagram again and again. But it's essentially like a very sort of disciplined way of working on an idea, getting feedback at all different phases of it, and that really just breaks down the process so that folks can get both more information and more feedback and refine their idea. The second part is resilience, and we talk about resilience in terms of both resilience to getting feedback, resilience to failure, resilience to the ability to be able to bounce back, both be open and willing to hear good feedback, and then be able to bounce back from the feedback. So, the first time somebody says to you, I either don't think this is a good idea or have you thought about that, to not just abandon the idea or kind of double down on what you're already thinking, but resilience and the ability to be flexible and incorporate what you heard as feedback and integrate that into your project. And then the last piece is what we call relating, but this is essentially network building with the perspective that in order for people to build ideas and create ideas, that you're going to need to have a community of support around you. And the very first community of support that you'll build is the cohort of fellows, and then beyond that, you'll be building a network of support for your ideas. And then just lastly, and folks have probably already seen this, but if you are interested, go to the Coraline website. You'll find several different ways you'll be able to get to the application process. And just so that folks know, the applications are due October 31st, so coming up soon. So with that, I'm going to transfer it to Chanel. And Chanel, if you can just talk about what your experience has been like, and we can go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Sujatha. So super glad to be here with you guys. Thanks for joining us. This fellowship experience has been really compelling for me. And I think I just want to start by telling you all my idea. It might give what I'm talking about a little bit of context. So I do in my everyday life communications work. Currently, I'm working for the ACLU as a communications strategist. And as a former journalist, I've realized doing movement work over the last 6 years that there's a deficit in communications work for organizations who are led by women and people of color. And so it's this really interesting kind of vortex where if you don't have enough funding, you can't hire a communications person, but if you can't create visibility for your work, you can't fundraise off of it. And so I was really interested in thinking through what it might look like to start a communications firm that catered to organizations with no communications capacity, predominantly those led by women and people of color, and we gave them subsidized communications capacity. And so I've been mulling through what that would look like. And so when we first went to the retreat in July, we came with our ideas, and that was pretty much it. And then when we got there, Sujatha and Tracy and the facilitators kind of started breaking down how we were going to work through our ideas and try to implement them and innovate them. And so I'll say the first thing that I recognized as being a Generative Fellow was there was a lot of fellowship. So we had, there were 16 of us, and everybody came with a different idea. And some of the ideas actually overlapped in some ways, which is really interesting and speaks to, I think, some uniformity in the movement in terms of what people think that we need. And we spent some time at the retreat getting to know one another, and it was really useful to have an evening before we got started to get to know who people were and why they were there. And it was actually just a really excellent kind of fellowship building evening where we just talked about our ideas and the required reading that we had, which gave us some context about what we would be talking about the following days. So in terms of the building community part of it, it's definitely a great opportunity to get to know other people working in the movement. And, for me, it's definitely most interesting to meet some of the folks from the flyover states whose context about reproductive health rights and justice is very different from my own. So we then started to learn about Sujatha mentioned the design thinking theory, and the chart that she shows you talks about the first step is really empathizing, and so it's really great to have something that's tangible and tested to be able to move your idea through. So just to give you an example, so the empathy, when you're thinking about, for example, my idea where it's communications, where I empathize with my end users, what we're calling them, so the people who would benefit from your idea, from the implementation of your idea, is the organizations who are in need of communications capacity who don't have that. So thinking about what their needs are, why I thought it was a good idea to have these folks as my end user, and how the implementation of the idea could benefit them and their base. And so, moving through that, we spent some time at the first retreat going through all of these and having one of the facilitators explain to us what each of these meant, what the process looked like, what it looked like contextually to be able to take your idea and kind of put it in this template, and then move through it. And why I find this useful for somebody like me. I am just the most distracted person in the world, and so it's really easy for me to get off task when thinking about an idea like this. So having a template where I can just move from step to step was really useful. And then, Sujatha mentioned kind of being curious and generative as pieces of the fellowship and of Coraline in general. It's coming to the retreat as a fellow, being curious about the ways in which I could add what I was feeling passionate about to the movement, made me think outside of the box and outside of my organization. And the ACLU does great work, and also, at some point it would be really great to move in a different direction when thinking about, how, personally for me, how communications can really benefit the movement outside of an organizational framework. And so I've always been curious about that, about, what it would look like to have specifically the people that I was talking about going in and teaching folks about communications would be from the communities that they would be from the communities that the organizations work in. And so instead of having like large firms come in and teach the organizations about their communities, you would have people who already knew exactly what those communities needed. And so this has been just a really fantastic experience. What has really also helped is that we've set up monthly calls for small groups of us, or 16. So somebody from Coraline will get on the phone with us and say, where are you in your process? Like, what kind of questions do you have? Or I'm currently right now at the prototyping phase, and so I have lots of questions about if I'm going to subsidize the communications work for these organizations, how am I going to get the money to do that? Who are the people that I hire to train them? How do I decide who they are? I've been very lucky that I'm currently at the point where I'm going to be able to prototype and test my idea through a for-profit communications firm based in New York who's really interested in having a philanthropic arm and wants to know, if they pay me to do work for them, can then the money that that they're paying me go to and additional funds also go to helping to subsidize these organizations. And so I'm still definitely in the works, but it's something that is really kind of filling out, and I feel very excited about stepping outside of my comfort zone, which is traditionally strategic communications on the organizational level, to be able to think more thoroughly about how my communications experience and the communications experience of people that I'd be working with can help to help us smaller organizations and organizations run by women and people of color to create visibility for their work. I'm very lucky in that I live in Oakland, and so there were 4 folks from Oakland who are part of the first cohort, and so we meet every 3 weeks, and we set up like a small agenda, and basically what we do is we're like, what questions do you have? Where are you in your idea? How can we support you? And which I will say, is the reason why I've gotten so far in building out my idea too, is being able to have that fellowship, the calls that we have with Coraline Facilitator every month, and then, having some fellowship with folks who are local. And I know that there are some folks who are living in states where there isn't another fellow, but they've set up like Google Hangouts so that they can check in with each other. And so it's been a really great experience for me. There wasn't a single, I don't ever consider myself an entrepreneurial person, but the way that this is set up, where it integrates movement work that we're already passionate about, allows you to be an innovator when possibly you never thought of yourself that way. And so it's given me a lot of confidence about moving forward communications work that I'm not seeing happening in the movement right now, and the support from both the Coraline staff and the other fellows is really helpful in doing that. So happy to answer any questions you all have about it, and whether it's on this call or even offline after this.
Chanel, can you say, so one of the things I think for both Coraline that was unexpected and perhaps for the fellows too, was how what an impact this had personally in terms of like growth and leadership. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, it's one thing to come to my office every day and like to work from the work plan that I have organizationally, but in terms of, being a leader both in like the area in which I'm working and in the field, sometimes when you're working organizationally, it can feel like that it's hard to move through that. And so, the last few months have been, in terms of growth, I've expanded my thoughts about, both movement work and my ability to be a leader in the movement through the fellowship significantly because I'm forced to think about ways in which I can contribute to the larger movement as opposed to just contributing organizationally. And not to say that that doesn't, contribute to larger movement, but as an individual, not thought of as, a strategist for the ACLU, but as Chanel Matthews, who's a communicator and whose heart is in ensuring that everybody has access to the communication tools that they need to be able to create visibility for the really important work that's happening on the ground. And so I've felt really challenged, and I'll just share with you, my idea has gone through multiple iterations, and I've kind of shed my initial thoughts about my idea because I've been pressed to think outside of the box about the ways in which I would organize communications from how I would actually help these people. And we all come with these preconceived notions about what the movement needs and how we can contribute to it. And then when you're surrounded by a lot of brilliant minds, and people are like, well, why would you do it like that? Why wouldn't you think about doing like this? I mean, when we first got to the fellowship, I had mentioned something about grants, and somebody was like, well, this and that is, are you actually, you have a 501c3 or something? I'm not an ED, I'm not somebody who works in finance, and they just made me think about, what raising money would look like. I don't know what that looks like, but there are people in the room with that kind of experience. And so throughout the process, I've grown significantly in my strategic thinking about implementation and, who needs what, and if I'm, also, checking my ego about how much, I know about communications and realizing that there is so much more that I can learn in the process. And so I think the leadership development part of it is really amazing, and, you're just tapping into a part of you that, you may or may not have known was there.
Right. And just for, I chatted this, but if folks have questions, now would be a great time to start asking them. And then also just to share from a Coraline perspective, we also feel very much like we are in this innovation cycle here. Where we certainly started out with one idea of what we thought we were defining as a problem and what we thought of as a solution around creating a culture of innovation. And so we are also in the process of refining and innovating on our idea of what these generative fellowships are. So there's a heavy emphasis internally on learning and feedback. And so it's been a fascinating process to both be partnering with and accompanying the fellows as they go through their process and reflecting on how that then feeds back into the fellowship and how we can be improving the fellowship. And so it's been a very exciting time. And just like that sense of like we all get to be innovators together has just been very sweet and powerful. And it looks like there's a question, so let me actually just, okay. Chanel, do you want to answer that question that Sarah poses?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, that's clear, Sarah. So I think what's happening right now in our group of four is that, one of us is an executive director, another one of us works in comms, another one of us works is a MPP student, and so like all of us have different networks, and I think that it didn't seem that there was necessarily an expectation from the fellowship, but it kind of came organically. So as we were at the retreat, what we realized is that because we had all of these different networks, that we were able to tap into them, and everybody wanted to. I mean, folks wanted to help other people. It was like, oh, I have access to this, and I have access to this, and we started a listserv, and so we're able to share ideas in a Facebook group. We're able to share ideas through both of those, and so I'll just share, for example, what I'm doing right now, where I'm at in my project is, since I'm at the kind of the prototyping phase, I need to ask questions of I need to be able to know the organizations that I plan on working with. I need to be able to understand what their needs are I don't want to make assumptions about that. That would undermine kind of my project and actually the research part of it. So with my group, I was able to say, who do you all know who is an organization who needs communication capacity but can't afford it, and has also had experience working with consultants, right? Because on my end, one of the kind of requirements I was saying was that if they haven't worked with consultants before, it would be really difficult because that is a whole other step to get them to understand what it's like to work with a consultant who's going to help you build your capacity. And so the folks in my group were able to connect me with 5 or 6 different organizations who were able to answer a few questions that I put in the form of a survey. And so I think that this kind of grew organically, that we all really wanted to help each other and that we felt comfortable doing it. And the few days we had at the retreat was just super, we just bonded a lot. There were opportunities to hike and to do yoga, and we ate together. And so it was like, mini summer camp. So after that, we all felt really comfortable with saying, if you need anything, please feel free to ask. And because geographically we're all in different areas, it was a really just a really great group of people to be able to network with.
Yeah.
Was that helpful?
Definitely helpful. And let me just add on to that. One of the things that we really try and debunk through the fellowship in everything that we do is the idea of the innovator as this like solo person who is kind of toiling away in their basements, isolated from community, and kind of working on an idea. And really, both because what we're talking about is innovation in a social change context, in a social movement context. These are ideas that need to engage and inspire folks. And that meet a need in the movement. And so by definition, developing an idea requires developing a network of folks who are both informing the idea, but that are also the network of folks that would actually use the idea. And so, it's one of the beauties of the fellowship is that there's folks from both all around the country and in different parts of the movement. So there are folks who are working on arts-related projects and communications-related projects, but also like much more about progressive politics or interpersonal dynamics, or so there were folks who were working on very different projects, and so they were able to kind of come together, share both information and different perspectives, but also share those resources. So, yeah. And, okay. I know that we don't actually have that many folks on the webinar, and wanted to offer folks a last chance to ask any questions. See the question from Judy. Absolutely. And in fact, we had a couple of public health folks in this first cohort, and I expect that there will be several public health folks. I know that there several public health folks are applying. So one of the core ideas also with innovation, and particularly this model of innovation, is that you want as diverse a number of perspectives as possible, and that even within a network, it's the folks who are on the fringes and on the margins of anybody's network that are going to sort of bring in the most interesting ideas. And so we actually have very broad definition of who's eligible to apply. So we don't require any organizational affiliation. We don't require any particular history of working within the movement. All that we require is that people share that vision that we have of winning resources, rights, and respect for all people's sexual and reproductive lives, and that the ideas that people are exploring fit within that vision. So we had, in this first cohort, we had some folks who were working on issues of race and racism in service of the vision. We had somebody who was working on violence issues, and violence and consent and masculinity issues, also with that very broadly fit in the vision. And so please don't feel that that we have any hard or fast guidelines about who cannot apply or what sectors are not eligible to apply. So it really is, if you share the vision with us, we welcome your application. And it looks like that might be it for the questions. Does anybody have any questions about the application process itself? We just did a recent iteration to clarify the application process. So if you're working on the application right now, hopefully you're working on the most recent version of it. And with that, I think we are going to close out unless there is any last question. And it does not look like that. Thank you so very much, Chanel. I don't know if you have any last thoughts to share.
Yeah, I'll just say that this is a really I think that for a lot of us working in movement work, thinking about innovation seems like a distant idea because our day-to-day is so super chocked full of work to get done, both organizationally or if you're a consultant. But the opportunity to be able to think about an idea that I have, is just, it's such a phenomenal opportunity, and to network with the people here in Oakland, and our meetings our Coraline meeting, our Oakland meetup has become just even more than a Coraline meetup. It's become like, we look forward to it every 3 weeks. We do a potluck, and it's just been great for fellowship with other people working in the movement, and we're building friendships and ideas, and it's just a really excellent way to build your leadership and to grow into a leader within both the area of work you work in, whether it's public health or communications, but also within our movement. So I strongly encourage you all to apply.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you all very much, and thank you, Chanel, once again. And with that, we will end the webinar. Thank you, and have a good rest of your evening. Yep. Bye-bye.